Yeah, hi folks. Well, it appears to me America is imploding. It has been deliberately torn apart by the communist Democrats from within. They are deliberately allowing illegal immigration to get out of control, spending is getting out of control, and high tax hikes will follow. Nothing is off the agenda. Court packing will take place, elections are being rigged in favour of the Democrats, history is being cancelled, people are being cancelled, and they are intentionally dividing America through critical race theory and Black Lives Matter. And communist China loves it. And when communist China sees stuff like this, which I recorded yesterday, they see weakness. Now, folks, I posted a link to this article in the description below. Anti-racist Zoom seminars asked to reflect whether they are white supremacists and their children told whiteheads are dangerous places for black people. Parents fury at lessons in wokeness, but who are too terrified to speak out. Parents say they've been overwhelmed by education reformers seeking to impose anti-racist agendas on America's schools. The stuff is intense, one mother told dailymail.com. They told us the most dangerous place for a black person to live is in a white person's imagination. An NYC high school principal sent parents a survey asking them to reflect where they land on a scale from white supremacist to white abolitionist. Public school parent Kerry Lecter of Ann Arbor, Michigan, said, "This whole woke movement is horrible for society. Everyone's open to be receptive of things, but they're jamming it down our throats in the worst way," Lecter added. Many parents say they believe the education reform is well-intentioned but often rushed, condescending, insulting and poorly timed. The woke movement in education has ignited passion on all sides, with some on the right denouncing diversity plans as Marxist and leftist indoctrination, because that is exactly what it is. Parents are afraid to speak out, one father from Maryland said. They don't feel like they can fight this. They're afraid of being cancelled, being called a racist. Well, that's exactly what will happen. Now, I'll just scroll down to another very vulgar part. The 8 white identities. There is a regime of whiteness, and there are action-oriented white identities. People who identify with whiteness are one of these. It's about time we built an ethnography of whiteness, since white people have been the ones writing about and governing others. White supremacist clearly marked white society that preserves names and values white superiority. White voyeurism. Wouldn't challenge a white supremacist desires non-whiteness because it's interesting, pleasurable, seeks to control the consumption and appropriation of non-whiteness, fascination with culture, consuming black culture without the burden of blackness. White privilege may critique supremacy, but a deep investment in questions of fairness, equality under the normalization of whiteness and the white rule, sworn goal of diversity. White benefit. Sympathetic to a set of issues but only privately, won't speak, act in solidarity publicly because benefiting through whiteness in public, or through benefiting through whiteness in public. Some POC, people of colour, are in this category as well. So how can black people be white? White confessional. Some exposure of whiteness takes place, but as a way of being accountable to people of colour after seeking validation from people of colour. White critical. Take on board critiques of whiteness and invest in exposing, marking the white regime. Refuses to be complicit with the regime, whiteness speaking back to whiteness. White traitor. Actively refuses complicity, names what's going on, intention is to subvert white authority and tell the truth at whatever cost. Need them to dismantle institutions. Wow. White abolitionist. Changing institutions, dismantling whiteness and not allowing whiteness to reassert itself. So obviously, 8 is good, 1 is bad. Now this stuff comes from critical race theory. And they see a man who's a very weak and frail. A very weak and frail man. A weak and frail leader. Oh no. Yeah, now what is it with this? Now what is it with this guy and those silly, pathetic little runs he does? What's he trying to prove? Stop the silly running, Joe. You're not a young man anymore. Here he is, still trying to run. My God, the guy is a cartoon. And of course they see a man who knows he's really not the president.
Now, when President Harris and I took a virtual tour of a vaccination center in Arizona.
President Harris. Another gaffe, I suppose. I almost kind of feel bad pointing them out at this point, but it does matter because the rest of the world, including countries that hate us, like Russia, Iran, and China, are sizing Biden up. And they're likely seeing a pretty easy target. Today, Russian President Vladimir Putin responded after Biden said this to George Stephanopoulos.
So you know Vladimir Putin, you think he's a killer?
Mm-hmm. I do.
So what price must he pay?
The price he's going to pay, well, you'll see shortly.
Well, Putin responded by challenging Joe Biden to a live debate, telling Russian state TV, I want to propose to President Biden to continue our discussion, but on the condition that we do it basically live, as it's called, without any delays and directly in an open, direct discussion.
Where Putin would eat him alive.
Putin knows that the president can barely handle questions from the American media that loves him. Our enemies know we have a weak president and a foreign policy team that is full of globalists. Naturally, they're licking their lips. Biden's foreign policy team met with the Chinese today, and to their credit, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and company called out the Chinese. Take a listen.
We'll also discuss our deep concerns with actions by China, including in Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Taiwan, cyber attacks on the United States, economic coercion toward our allies. Each of these actions threaten the rules-based order that maintains global stability. That's why they're not merely internal matters and why we feel an obligation to raise these issues here today.
Well, Blinken called China out for a number of the horrible acts that have become commonplace under this communist regime. The Chinese then fired back. Take a listen.
It is important for the United States to change its own image and to stop advancing its own democracy in the rest of the world.
Yeah, but it's okay for you to push your communism through the Belt and Road Initiative.
Many people within the United States actually have little confidence in the democracy of the United States, and they have various views regarding the government of the United States. In China, according to opinion polls, the leaders of China have the wide support of the Chinese people.
The Chinese saying that their own polling shows that everybody loves their communist regime. It's priceless. And then the Chinese actually brought up Black Lives Matter, which may seem random to you, but trust me, it should not.
The challenges facing the United States in human rights are deep-seated. They did not just emerge over the past 4 years, such as Black Lives Matter.
Yes, when the Chinese see Black Lives Matter riots, critical race theory and the word racism used by leftist politicians and the media every 5 minutes, they pounce because it helps their communist agenda.
You see, China loves to bring up racial unrest in our country because they are actively promoting it. In fact, China is funding BLM. It's a proud partnership. Here's an article from our friends at the Heritage Foundation. This BLM co-founder and pro-communist China group are partnering up. Here's why. The article talks about Alicia Garza, one of BLM's co-founders, a woman who wants to see this country destroyed and rebuilt under the tenets of Karl Marx. Here's a quote from the article. Go to the website for the Black Futures Lab, a venture of BLM founder Alicia Garza, and click on the donate button. It'll ask you to send money to an obscure organization, the Chinese Progressive Association, explaining that Black Futures Lab is a fiscally sponsored project of the Chinese Progressive Association.
Yeah, so there you go, folks. Communist China is funding Black Lives Matter. And now look at what they are forcing into schools with the aid of Communist China.
Now, we've spent the last several years telling you about what's happening at the level of higher education in colleges and universities. Tonight, we want to take you through what's happening in high schools and elementary schools all across the country. We're going to start tonight in Buffalo. Schools in Buffalo now have what they call an Office of Culturally and Linguistically Responsive Initiatives. The Buffalo School District's first days of school lesson plan explicitly gets political in very specific terms. Do Black Lives Matter in America? It begins. And then by the end, it declares at the end of the lesson, quote, students will be able to understand the need for the Black Lives Matter movement. Here you have a school district explicitly endorsing a political movement. And that's for little kids. By the time they hit the 5th grade, students in Buffalo are reading advanced BLM studies. Students learn about BLM's core platform, and that includes, quote, disrupting the Western prescribed nuclear family structure, destroying the family.
Yes, these communists have already destroyed many, if not most, black families in America through welfare, and now they're coming after the rest, including whites, through education.
Endorsed by Buffalo schools. At the end of the program, students are asked this, quote, what do you think about our society being organized into separate nuclear family units? The implication, of course, is that it's immoral. Your own family is immoral. And that's just the beginning. Buffalo Public Schools go on to suggest that George Washington, the man who founded this country, was a fraud, that Colin Kaepernick is a moral hero, and that we shouldn't celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day instead of Thanksgiving. We have no right to give thanks for a country that isn't ours. By the time they hit high school, students in Buffalo are ready to go out into the world to destroy buildings and statues. That's what they're being trained for. They're asked this explicitly, quote, why would someone engaging in rioting be protected under the First Amendment? Okay. So this is everywhere, by the way. We don't mean to single out Buffalo. It's happening in middle schools all over the country. They're celebrating something called Black Lives Matter Week of Action. Again, Black Lives Matter is a political party. And yet schools are endorsing it and its specific aims. Cities that are doing this include Seattle, Portland, Oregon, Los Angeles, the second largest city in the country, Chicago, the third largest, Milwaukee, Boston, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Baltimore, and we could go on. The lesson plan requires children to, quote, examine the ways the Black Panther Party successfully functioned to preserve the values of black families and villages, end quote. the Black Panther Party, racial separatists with a history of murdering people. But of course, that's not included. This is rewriting history, including recent history that all of us are very familiar with. They're lying about it already. Look at the image on the screen. This is from a third grade class in the Fairfield-Susan Unified School District in California. The comparison suggests that police respond only to BLM riots. Of course, that's a lie, but kids are being taught that. They're being taught more broadly that the police are the problem. They're the ones who commit violence. Look at this drawing. It was posted on an online photo album about D.C. Public Schools' Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action. How young was the kid who was forced to draw a police officer shooting and killing someone?
Well, and how much damage does that do to children? And does damage for life? It's absolutely disgusting.
This is Khmer Rouge propaganda.
It most certainly is.
It's not education. But again, that's just the beginning. Schools have eliminated biology. They're teaching children biology isn't real. How can you teach something that is fake? So they're not. One of the guiding principles of the Black Lives Matter at Schools curriculum, of course, is to be, quote, transgender affirming. So they have no choice. Out with biology, in with BLM. Here's how one pre-kindergarten teacher in a New York public school teaching described this principle. Quote, everybody has the right to choose their own gender by listening to their own heart and mind. Everyone gets to choose if they are a boy or a girl or both or neither or something else. And no one gets to choose for them. So science isn't real. Again, this is being taught to children in schools in lieu of actual science. This is religion. This is insanity. This is also required. Parents could fight back, and in some rare cases they have. In November of 2019, for example, this show highlighted a teacher training program from Corwin called, quote, Deep Equity. The point of Deep Equity is to produce real school improvement for equity and social justice, end quote. In other words, not to teach children facts, but to brainwash them. According to Deep Equity, the point is to adopt a, quote, transformationalist white identity, where, quote, white folks are attempting to come to terms with race in a real way and question the systemic issues that have caused whites to be in a much superior position. In schools, they're teaching this, race hate. Teachers are given white allies agenda items. Quote, see race, listen to and learn from people of color. Acknowledge the reality of racism. Acknowledge the reality of white racial privilege. Transcend guilt. Educate other white people. Confront racist behaviors, attitudes, and practices. Use your privilege to work for racial and social justice, end quote. Again, we're going to look back at this.
Yeah, now equity doesn't mean equality. It means affirmative action. It means blacks should get a pass for failing. 2 and 2 equals 5 is okay. Yeah, now you may ask what this has to do with New Zealand. Well, the answer is everything. The communists in America are exactly the same as the communists here. Now, if this Black Lives Matter stuff gets a foothold in America, it will be down here in 5 minutes.